this is the bit where I just burst into laughter because I get so nervous, but it's recording at the moment, Lauren. I should start teaching, shouldn't I? Anyway, so the aim of the session is to have a look at some of the things you need to think about for the first assignment. Right. So just ignore this bit when you view the video. But anyway, let's move on to the first point. So credits. Now, this one's a bit confusing because generally you either have... Sorry, thank you, Mark. See, I don't know what I'm doing. Right, there you go. It's back on there. Credits. Yeah. So, surprisingly, this one comes up as 0 credits. Please don't be misled into thinking that the universities don't consider this particular unit. It's an introductory unit, however, you must pass this one in order to carry on the course anyway. So even though it's 0 credits, very, very important. Now, in terms of marking, generally speaking, what I have to do is give you a pass or a refer. But what I'm going to do to help you with your levels is I'm going to give you a number out of 100. So depending on how well you do, you will get a percentage. The grade bands will be 0 to 39 would be a refer, which means you have to do it again. And generally speaking, I'd give you a time limit to resubmit. And there are various guidelines for that, and we'll talk about that. But you'd have generally a week after feedback to resubmit. Hopefully that won't apply to anybody. So 0 to 39 is a refer. 40 to 49 will be a it's a bit wider than that. 40 to 59 is a pass. And that generally equates to a third if you want to grade it in terms of first, second and so on. 60 to 69 would be a merit, and 70 and above would be a distinction. And generally speaking, based on previous years of study, students who tend to get 70 and above in this first introductory exercise overall tend to come out with a distinction. So, if you start well, it's more than likely that you would carry on to do well. So 0 credits, but most important. Later on, we'll be doing some 3 credit points and then some 6 credit points. The one Jane is doing is a 6 credit point, and that's throughout the whole academic year. So that's an important one for you to work very hard on. Submission date, I think that should be on the sheets I've given you. So that is... I can't see it here.
6th of October.
6th of October. Is there a time? 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. Okay, so let's note that down. So 06, 10, 17, 1600 hours. Okay, so how do you submit your work? Email, please. If you are struggling to do that, let me know sooner rather than later. Generally speaking, what you tend to do is you would upload it to Turnitin, but I'll have to double check to see if that's working or not. But that's a software system that checks to make sure that you've properly referenced your work. So send it via email. I think the best thing would be to give yourself at worst 4 hours window, because if it's late, unfortunately we do have to mark it at best at a pass, and that applies to all your other assignments. So submitting assignments, very important. It can't be late, please. It can't be late, because we're following the trend of universities. They do exactly the same, and you get reduced marks if you submit your work on late. Right, okay, so form of assessment then. Form of assessment, it's an essay which tends to suggest chunks of information in paragraphs describing each question. However, on this occasion, I'm going to be very flexible, so you can either present your work as an essay, or I'm flexible enough for you to present it as a report if you want. So essay, report, no problem at all. And I think the main difference between an essay and a report is that in an essay you would hardly have any headings or divisions. You have continuous prose describing your answer in chunks of paragraph. But with a report, you might simply put question 1 and then a bit of information, question 2 and so on and so forth. So a report tends to be more structured if that's the way you prefer to work. Otherwise, an essay is completely fine so long as your work is clear enough for me to be able to pick out which bit of the assignment you're answering. So just make sure that distinction is very clear. So the option is there for you, and I'll leave you to decide what you think is best. Now there is an assessment criteria which simply tells you roughly what we'll be looking for. Let me just make sure that we have this here. If not, I'll send you that separately because it's new paperwork. So I'll probably not include this on here, but I will send you some guidelines. But I think the key thing that I'll be looking for, grammar in English, or grammar. That's the first thing that we look for. So grammar, spelling, punctuation. And what we're going through now is what we call the assessment criteria. So if you can put a tick next to this, then that's one, some credit gained towards your mark. So grammar, spelling, punctuation. The most important part of your assignment is the use and application of legal authority. So I think what I'm suggesting is don't say anything without supporting it with some form of legal authority. And that's the most important thing in your assignment. So nearly 90% of your answer has to fit in with the fact that you've used legal authority to support your views and arguments. Very important. When it comes to the citation of legal authority, and some of you will get your feedback for the personal statements that you've submitted, if you have a look through the PowerPoint slides that I've sent you, if you're citing a case, it's only a little thing but very important. So the actual name of the case, or the Crown and Smith, has to be italicized. The year doesn't have to be, and that form is perfectly fine. You don't need to put the actual report name with it as well. So the Crown and Smith 1992, but the Crown and Smith, R.V. Smith, has to be italicized, and that's legal convention when it comes to writing or typing out your answers. Okay. If you're referring to an Act of Parliament, then it's always a good idea to capitalise the first letter. Yeah? So, Theft Act 1978. So little things like that. That comes under the first point. Grammar, spelling, punctuation, format of presenting your answer. Okay. Structure of the yes, Dominic?
I missed that bit. Did you say when we say the Act of Parliament, what do we do with it?
Act of Parliament, just put a capital for the first letter.
Okay.
So if I go back on here, there we go. I've given you what not to do and the better formats to use. Yeah. Right, structure of essay, fairly straightforward. 3 things you need to remember, and some of you have done this over and over again. So you have your I'm going to be flexible on this point because you might want to do it at the beginning Some like to do a little bit per question, flexible on this occasion. Yeah, but generally speaking, any essay that you submit has to follow a basic format like this. A basic introduction, and then this is where you get the marks, yes, your body, and then you get a bit more marks depending on how you conclude your submission. Okay, so that's the format. So subheadings for clarity, again I've put that there, but that's if you follow the report format. Yeah, so you might want to put this is question 1 and so on and so forth. It's entirely up to you. Choose whichever one you want. You're not going to be penalised for that. Right, so this is yes.
Just to be sure, you know the essay version of it, it's just
Yes.
answering all the questions in
One chunk,
Okay,
absolutely.
cool. Yeah.
One chunk, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no problem.
So you don't put down question 1, question 2, question 3?
For report format, yes. But if you're doing it as continuous prose, then literally just give me a chunk of information, maybe truncated by paragraphs. Yeah. Is that clear enough? Yeah. Alicia.
How much do you like writing by epoxy?
Okay, that's a good question. That's a good question. I would suggest that you've got 1,800 words, so the majority of your answer would be for question 4. The next most important question there will be for question 3. And again, it might be a good idea if I do send you some information. I think let's get everything right and then you know exactly what you're doing. So question 4 is the most important. Question 3 is next. And then I might suggest that question 5 follows, and then the last, or the least, not least important, but the least information you need before the first question. Lydia.
Within your answer, do you need to write out the scenario, or do you just answer?
Good question, no. Good question, you don't know. So go straight into answering it, yes. Right, any more? Otherwise, this is the first question, define actus reus, and it depends on how you deal with that answer. We've had a look at actus reus by itself, so I think the most basic thing you look at is your definition. I think that's so important. So basic thing you start off with is give your definition. This demonstrates understanding. We have standard definitions for actus reus, but if you go that step further and explain it in your own words, then you get more acknowledgements, you get more marks. So very important. Okay? So define actus reus. The next important thing is to give an example. Give an example. And the better examples always tend to refer to a source of law. So I know you might be repeating this out because you've got to deal with one in question 2, but giving examples is going to be very, very important. Okay? So you might find an offence, for example. We put section 18, offence against the person Act 1861. So section 18, we've not done that before, so you get a few more ticks because you've done independent research. That demonstrates your ability to find extra information that we might not have dealt with in the lesson before. So that bit's important. Demonstrating a good example refers to a source. And then to conclude that little bit, you might want to talk about the different ways in which the actus reus is committed. So I'm just trying not to break my flow as I'm on telly. I'm on telly. Sorry, go ahead.
My pen's run out. Can I have a pen?
Oh, a pen, yes, you may. It's going to cost. No, it's not going to cost you.
Thank you.
What I say, I'm being recorded. I didn't ask for bribes or skittles whilst I'm being recorded. Right, anyway, so you've got your definition, you've got your example. The next thing is, we spoke about the fact that the actus reus has to be voluntary, and so there has to be evidence of causation. But don't be tempted to write a whole lot of information, bearing in mind that I've suggested that question 1 really just needs, a good summary and not a lot out of that 1,800 words. So that will be your judgment, and that's all part of the skill of only using, enough information to deal with each question. That's a skill as well. That's question 1. Move on to question 2. It says 2 things to identify. So if we read question 2 again, It says, read statutory provision below, identify the crime. It says, yes, there are two things you're looking at there. So, so then the two things that you need to do for question 2. Yeah? So pick out the offence. Whenever you pick out the offence, don't forget to include the source. And then once you've done that, talk about the actus reus. Now again, the actus reus, we haven't done this in lessons, but we're developing your ability for independent research. So any criminal law textbook that you've got will give you some information about the actus reus of the offence. The two have to marry up nicely. So don't just talk about actus reus in general, you're talking about actus reus relating to this particular crime that you've identified. Okay, so crime, identify it, support the crime with the correct legal authority, and then talk about the actus reus of that particular crime. Another word of advice, don't write reams and reams of information, because there is a temptation to do that. Omar?
You include the mens rea in the second answer, if need be.
Right, okay, that's a very good question indeed, and that's something you don't do. Very important. I'm saying it mildly, but that's because if you do discuss the mens rea in question 2, then you will lose some marks. It demonstrates your lack of understanding of the actual question. If you read the question, it clearly does say identify the crime and the corresponding actor. That's all you're doing. Yeah, so read the question, make sure you understand. So nothing at all on the mens rea. So if you include things like intention related to that particular offence, then you've gone a little bit off track. So only the offence, only the actus reus, nothing else. And it goes without saying that the same thing applies for question 4 when we get there. You're not talking about the actus reus in question 4, it's only the mens rea. Right, so question 3, let's move on to question 3. Again, you've got, it says here, you're focusing on the defendant, so Pitwood. If you have a look at the case of Pitwood, and all you've got to do for question 3 is you read the facts of, you don't have to read the whole case, but a summary of the facts on Pitwood, and just explain how the actus reus is committed. That's the important thing. We spoke about the voluntary nature, causation, omissions, circumstances, state of affairs, and so on. So you don't have to find all those things in each case. Each defendant might only have covered one aspect of the actus reus. So if it's just the fact that they committed the actus reus voluntarily, and also they omitted to do a particular thing, you don't have to find all the elements of the actus reus. Just one thing. If you can spot one thing of how the actus reus was committed, that will be good enough. So that's Pitwood. You do exactly the same for Plowie. So identify the actus reus, say how the actus reus was committed. And the key word here is how. So remember, you're talking about how. And when we spoke about how, we did say the actus reus has to be voluntary. Sometimes you can commit the actus reus by an omission. We also said that sometimes you look at the circumstances. And we also mentioned state of affairs. So you don't have to tick all of them, just tick one if one applies, or you might spot 2. That's perfectly fine. Bailey in 1983 put next to it automatism. So if you have a criminal law textbook, because don't forget Bailey is a fairly common name, so you're looking for the Bailey that relates to, not automatism, I'm thinking of, yes, automatism, yes. Yeah, Bailey next attached to automatism. what I might do is, again, I'll see if I can find more specific citation, because there are quite a lot of Baileys if you start searching. So again, do exactly the same. How was the actus reus committed? And again, don't stray past actus reus. You don't have to do any more than that. Nothing on the mens rea. Okay? Right, so question 4 is, as I say, the most important. I probably won't say a lot, but hopefully I can give you enough guidance for you to develop the responses that you need. Okay, so here you've got one main defendant, that's important. One main defendant. The defendant is the one obviously causing a bit of bother for everybody else. And that will be Alice. I think there's no contentious point about that. So one main defendant. Your introduction obviously will be what mens rea is and the different types of mens rea. So that could be your introduction to question 4. And once you've identified the defendant, the next thing you need to look at is the victim. Yeah, so you've got the defendant, we know that's Alice. Pick out a victim, because once you've picked out the victim, you can ask yourself, so what offence did the victim suffer? Once you've identified the offence that the victim has suffered, and don't forget the offence, again, will be something you find out yourself through independent research. So identify offence. Or possible offence. And once you've identified the possible offence, you can then talk about the mens rea. You might have to make some assumptions, because in the scenario she throws the vase. You have to discuss what happened next. Okay, so you might suggest that depending on the circumstances, if the vase had hit Beth, what offence that would be. You know, that there is a bit of leeway for you to do that. Okay, so you might clearly state you're assuming that if the vase had hit Beth, then this is the offence that might have been charged against the defendant. So in terms of the mens rea, all you're looking for is intention and recklessness. You've got to pick which one applies. So when she threw the vase towards Beth, did she have intention? She might have. But did she have direct intention? She might have. Did she have indirect intention? She might have. Was she reckless? You pick which one you feel is suitable.
So would you get marked down if you start talking about all the different things, like, say you found an omission, for example, there's one in there. Would you get marked down for talking about that, or was it because it only was the mens rea?
Well, you've always got to stay within the bounds of the question. So if you're dealing with mens rea, then that's all that you're dealing with. In order to get marks, so what you might do is, if you know the correct type of mens rea, you talk about that, and then you can gain extra marks by discounting another type of mens rea that might have been relevant. So you would say why you do not think that it's reckless, or you might say why you do not think that it's indirect intention, or you might say why you think it's not direct intention. So once you've pointed out what it is, you can gain extra marks by suggesting why it isn't the other, if that makes sense. Okay.
So you're evaluating.
Absolutely. So you're providing a higher level of answer, and you're demonstrating that you've not just picked one because you're guessing, but you're telling me why the other one doesn't apply. Yeah? So that's to do with Alice and Beth. And then it says there, talk about the major element that relates to Beth. We've done that one. So the next one, again, Alice is still in the frame because we're looking at Chris. This time, the offence has been named in the scenario. So identify the named offence and ask yourself the type of mens rea that Alice might have in relation to Chris. Because once you've identified the offence, as we always say, the source of the offence will tell you what the actus reus is and what the mens rea is. You don't worry about the actus reus because we don't have to worry about that. However, we do need to worry about the mens rea element. And you can only identify the mens rea element if you know what the offence is. And this time, unlike Alice and Beth, the offence is named. Okay? Okay, and then all you need to do is identify the mens rea element. And whilst you're doing this, don't forget your legal authority. If it's indirect intention, legal authority. If it's direct, there's not much else to say. However, if it's recklessness, then you might be able to talk about relevant cases that apply. If you pick the wrong one, nevertheless you give a good reason for picking the wrong one and you follow the legal authority behind that wrong, you still get credit for it. So that's one thing to remember. I mean, you get more credit for picking the right one, but if you pick the wrong one and yet still give a suitable explanation, you will get some credit for it. Lena?
So can I just clarify, can you just clarify, so if you write out another example case,
Right.
is that what you want us to do?
Is this for question 4?
Yeah.
Well, all you need to do is pick the relevant mens rea, and then the corresponding case that goes with. So if you suggest it's direct intention when really it's recklessness, if you give relevant argument towards direct intention, you will still get credit, but not the full credit.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. You won't get credit at all if you talk about actus reus in question 4, because question 4 doesn't require you to do that. Because we have, as we mentioned before, in terms of mens, you've got intention, direct or indirect, you've got recklessness, subjective or objective, depending, even though we know that we only have subjective. So if you pick the wrong one, you can still get credit, but it won't be the full credit. Did that answer your question or not?
Yeah.
No, don't say yes because you know, are you sure?
Yeah.
Well, ask again if you think of something else and if you want me to answer that. Louis?
Should we, question 4, should we reference other cases? So like if I thought it was direct intention, should I reference another case with direct intention?
If there is one, yes, absolutely. Or you might give an example. Yes, yeah, yes, yeah. So that deals with question 4, and finally question 5. Again, question 5 is a bit straightforward. However, it's a bit more heavily weighted than the first question. So question 5 is all about coincidence of actus reus and mens rea. I think the theme that you need to develop, and if you read your text, if you come across one transaction or continuing acts, what does that mean in terms of equating the presence or identifying the presence or coexistence of actus reus and mens rea? So read your textbooks for that one. Explain the case of Fagan and MPC, and when I say explain, don't quote all the facts of the case because that will eat up your word count. All you're doing is you're identifying the actus reus, telling me which one came first, and then when, the point of coincidence. That's so important. So Fagan and MPC, point of coincidence of actus reus and mens rea, and which one came first. That's the key information I'll be looking for. The same thing applies to Tabo Meli. Again, you're looking at when the elements came together, and you know, sensible discussion about those particular points. In terms of the word count, you're allowed 10% above and below if you need to. So 10% of 1800 is 180. Even with my very poor maths, I think I could easily do that one. So you can write at most 1,800 plus 180 words on top of that. Your cases don't count, and I'm normally generous enough to suggest that your case facts don't count either. And I've got a gadget, I've mentioned it before, Turnitin would help me work out, you know, quotes that you've used. So any quotes that you've used, so long as you've referenced them properly. Now I have to admit, I'm not the best person to talk to you about referencing. Jane or Emma normally does that, but what I said to Omar, I think yesterday, or somebody, I've forgotten who, is I'll see if I can find a referencing booklet for you, and I'll zap that to you, and you can read and research and use the referencing for that. But you do need to reference websites, or especially textbooks, obviously, journal articles, and so on and so forth. So the referencing is quite important, but I'll get a referencing book to you. At the moment, I believe the college uses Harvard referencing, so the booklet I send you will be based on Harvard, even though some universities use Scholar, which is a completely different referencing system. For us, we will use Harvard, and I will send you a booklet. Somebody remind Jody, you remind me if I forget, please, to send you the Harvard referencing. When is the 6th anyway? Is that next Wednesday?
2 weeks today.
2 weeks today, right, okay, 2 weeks today. Lydia, yes?
If you do the report layout, would the subheadings count towards your work?
No, they won't, no. That's a good question, yes, no, they won't count. And as I say, I am generally a little bit flexible, but the only reason why I have to enforce it is when you get to university, you enforce it, so you might as well get a taste here. So that, everybody, are there any questions at all? And don't forget, between now and the 6th of October, you can still ask me questions or email me. I'm not going to give you answers, obviously, but you can ask for advice and help between now and the 6th of October, because the whole idea is a good springboard from this assignment to the rest of the assignments that you do with me. Okay, and Jane and Emma as well. Olivia.
So will you be using the results from this, like the grades from this, even though it's technically not correct?
Yes.
As I predicted grades?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, I will. And I will also be using your contributions in the lessons as well to help me formulate. So, you know, it's just going to be between a distinction overall, a merit or a pass. And that's how, you know, based on what you get in, after the 6th of October. I'm trying to think, some need theirs before the 15th, so this afternoon we'll be doing a bit of personal statements and so on and so forth. Based on what I've seen so far, plus the results from this assignment. Any other questions? Otherwise, my moment of fame on YouTube comes to an end, and I shall say goodbye to the camera. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you have found these slides quite useful. It's strange looking into the camera, isn't it? Jodie, please do me the honour and favour of pressing the record button. Good night, and I shall see you in